here's a question that I have, because you mentioned earlier that the um the people push back against agriculture.
Mhm.
And so if agriculture, like forgetting the other resources, but just talking about food, if we were to get rid of agriculture, what the heck would we do?
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and in today's episode, we got yet another non-ag folk to join us for another conversation. This is Kara. I'm going to let her give her own introduction before we get started, though.
Hi, I am Kara, and I'm 31, and I live in Vancouver Island, in BC, Canada. So there's lots of agriculture around me, and like many people, I dream of owning a farm one day, but unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet.
Awesome. And like, like we were talking about before the podcast, you'd be surprised how many people come on here and say, I want to be a farmer. What does that take? But no, it's funny that you're from Canada. I have a surprising fellowship in Canada, but despite not being Canadian. But awesome. So yeah, I'm glad that we were able to connect. We, like most of my guests, met on Reddit. So it's always a fun. I can't talk today. It's always a fun place on Reddit, being able to find people that have an interest in things that you like to talk about.
And what's cool about Reddit, sorry, not to
Yeah,
cut
you're
you
good.
off, but what's cool about Reddit to me is that, like, until you actually get on a call, you have no idea, like, anything about that person is so anonymous, right?
Right.
So you hop on a call and you're like, oh, that's not at all what I expected, but okay.
Right. No, exactly. And that's the funny thing is people always kind of question, like, why do you take people off of Reddit? Like, don't you like to know who you're going to have a call with? I was like, no, that's the most fun part. Like, my podcast is open to everybody. And so I like to bring on people that I don't know who they are. That way I can learn about them with the audience.
hmm
So
Yeah, that's ideal. It's so much fun.
yeah. So for today's conversation, you had mentioned that you have interest in, eventually owning a farm, being a
Mhm.
farmer as some kind of small operation. But other than that, you have no other experience with agriculture. Is that right?
Well, I mean, not really. I've done volunteering on a farm a couple times, and of course gardening,
Okay.
and I've like visited permaculture farms to kind of check out that whole situation and stuff. But
Nice.
as far as direct experience, not a lot, like planting raspberries and stuff for farm volunteers and
Nice.
cuddling goats, obviously.
That's always fun. So then I have to ask, what is the most appealing thing about agriculture to you? What makes you want to be a farmer?
That's a great question. I think that really what it is, what's such a big draw to me is the idea of stepping out of the system that we're in
Mhm.
and really just, like, I guess, connecting to history, connecting to our ancestors, connecting to the earth, and sort of like, I think that a lot of what today's world, quote unquote, is just kind of a lot of silly nonsense that makes us miserable. And I think farming is the antithesis of that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and that actually kind of falls along this theme that I've been pushing really hard with the podcast. That agriculture, I personally believe, serves as a bridge between society and nature. That
Mhm.
it's kind of our most direct link to the natural world, while still being able to be civilized. We're not just sitting in a forest, foraging or hanging out with the wild animals. Which, I mean, that's fine too if that's your thing, but agriculture gives us an organized way to behave naturally within the environment, and it kind of gives us an obligation to take care of both the environment and our civilization through the same means, and that's pretty
And
cool too.
ourselves too.
Right.
Like, it's such hard work that if you're not taking care of yourself, it's just not going to happen.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's a big thing is, the mental health of those involved in agriculture is something that's often overlooked, but it's one of the most important aspects of the job.
Mhm.
I actually have a friend who runs a podcast all about the mental health of farmers, and it's
Oh,
an amazing show.
oh, what's it called?
It's what is it called? It's I want to say it's hold on one second. Let me check it, because I always say it wrong. I want to make sure I get it right. That way I can properly give him the attention he
The
deserves.
credit, yeah.
Yeah, it's ag state of mind. That's what it is.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna look at that after.
yeah. The host Jason, he's awesome dude. He's super nice, and he's like a mental health.
Professional?
I guess yeah, he's a doctor of sorts in that department, but he's also a farmer, so he understands both sides of it really well.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Oh,
He's
I'm so
awesome.
excited. Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a big thing for personal health, for for the health of those that benefit from the food we grow, and for the environment. There's a lot of hands relying on those people growing the food.
Okay, so I have a question about agriculture then,
All right.
which I guess is the point. So I hear a lot like from different groups, often like vegans, different groups
Hmm.
who will say that, or people who are anti-vegan, it's really everybody,
Yeah.
who will say that like agriculture is bad for the environment
Hmm.
in X way. And I've never believed that to be true, especially responsible agriculture. Do you have, can you help me understand that a little better?
Yeah, for sure. So, that's one of the most common claims against agriculture is that it's harmful to the environment. There's a few other claims that people like to make to oppose agriculture, but that's probably the most uh, effective one, I guess I would say. And the
Hmm.
reason why it's effective is because there is some truth to it. But like you said, responsible agriculture is not harmful to the environment. It's actually very beneficial to the environment.
Hmm.
A lot of the reason that people say that agriculture is so harmful to the environment is because of the Green Revolution. So, the Green Revolution, for anyone in the audience, and I'm guessing for yourself who don't know,
Yeah.
is the third revolution of agriculture. And agriculture's had, I think we're going on the fifth revolution of agriculture. We're somewhere
Oh,
fourth or
wow.
fifth. It's kind of not clear which one we're in right now. Well, I think we're starting the fifth, but everyone kind of disagrees, and they're still in
Fair
the
enough. It's hard to know until hindsight. Yeah.
right. So yeah, but the third revolution, the Green Revolution, is also known as the chemical revolution. So it was the introduction of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and
Okay.
that's where a lot of the environmental damage starts to come in. Not saying that those things are bad, but misuse of those things can cause damage that's irreversible.
It's so
Or
interesting that that's called the Green Revolution. You would,
right.
because that's so often associated with environmentalism.
Right. And that's kind of the irony with it. And well, to be fair, when they introduced these things, they thought that it was going to be beneficial for everything. That,
Hmm.
introducing these chemicals was going to help, plants grow better, and it was going to help agriculture thrive. And that's why it was called the Green Revolution, is because it was going to cause all this greenery to appear.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's something that wasn't really we didn't really foresee how negative the ramifications could be from those chemicals.
Hmm.
And again, that's not saying that they're bad. They're definitely useful in a lot of ways. It's just that if you're not careful, that they can cause things that we don't really know how to fix yet. So like for example, pesticides. A lot of people have opposition to pesticides. They only buy things that were never sprayed with pesticides, or they refuse to buy anything that has been sprayed, with certain pesticides or whatever.
Hmm.
The reason for that is because, well, there's two reasons. People fear, for one, the potential for pesticide residue, so they don't want to eat food that might still have pesticides on it because they're
Hmm.
worried it's going to poison them, or it's going to hurt, it's going to make them sick, or something's going to happen to them.
Hmm.
And the second reason is because they fear pesticide residue in the soil, because having those chemicals in the soil can damage the soil, and that makes it so you can't grow food on that soil anymore.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the fear of the environmental side of things, and that's not the only one. There's other ones. More of the animal agriculture stuff is kind of the fear of like the methane emissions and carbon emissions, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But the that's where the fear comes from, but that's not really accurate to how agriculture functions anymore.
Hmm.
And this is kind of a common theme that you'll see, is a lot of people are fearful of different aspects of agriculture because that's how they used to be, but that's not how
Hmm.
they are anymore. And people don't realize how fast agriculture has updated.
That
And
makes sense. That makes sense. I think
mhm.
that that happens in almost every area of life where people are like, yeah, but look at the history and look how it is. And it's like, well, that hasn't been true for 20 years, you
Right.
know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, there are definitely some practices back in the day that we definitely should have seen, firsthand, that they were not good practices. Like for example, oranges. Oranges are very susceptible to cold,
Hmm.
to freeze damage and that kind of thing. And so one of the methods we used to use to keep our trees warm were we would just burn tires underneath them.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
terrible. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but that was possibly one of the worst things that agriculture's ever done.
That's, I shouldn't laugh, but like that's so like hilariously like poorly thought out.
Right.
Um, so I guess so I've got a question about you said that's the third revolution. So would the
Mhm.
first revolution have been like the discovery of being able to farm, and then the second revolution is like crop cycling?
So you're almost there. So the first revolution is, like you said, the kind of the invention of agriculture, the realization that we could cultivate land and utilize it to consistently produce food. That way we don't have to forage or gather or do anything like that
Yeah.
anymore. The second revolution was the creation of tools. That was,
Oh.
the first plow, the use of animals to pull, machinery through the fields, the use of, shovels and hoes and that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
That was kind of the second revolution, and technically the invention of the tractor is included in that. So the second revolution is one of the longest revolutions
I
because it
was
went
just gonna say
from
that's a long time from
yeah.
hoes to tractors.
Right. So the first revolution was kind of like they had basic tools, but they didn't have anything like they didn't have a plow. They didn't really figure out how to draw animals or anything like that for a while. So the first
Okay.
revolution was pretty short. And then the second revolution began, and that's where we started to get more kind of the early stages of mechanized agriculture. And that's where we got tractors and plows and a bunch of other, more advanced technologies that we see more frequently now that they wouldn't have even known about back in the early days of agriculture. And then we got to the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution actually occurred in the mid 1900s. It's like the 1950s, I believe. So it's pretty recent,
Yeah.
and that has been the most consistent form of agriculture for a while. And then in the
Hmm.
early 2000s, we started to get into the fourth revolution. And here's the part where it gets kind of sticky because nobody really knows where, like, if there is a difference between the fourth and fifth, or if they're the same thing, or if nobody can agree on this.
Hmm.
So the fourth revolution, this is how I've always kind of viewed it. The fourth
Okay.
revolution is the second mechanization of agriculture. So that's kind of the adaptation of GPS tractors, of drones, of artificial intelligence, like the technologies that we use to kind of automize agriculture.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I view the fifth revolution as the combination of that with traditional regenerative methods. So it's kind of the sustainable movement, the idea
Hmm.
behind producing food in a way that's environmentally friendly, but also yields the same, level of production as conventional agriculture.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of the controversy, is that they say that, that the regenerative, era is not a new generation of agriculture, is just, it's just what we're doing right now. But I think that, we created a lot of new technology in the second mechanization of agriculture, like the
Hmm.
fourth revolution, the automated agriculture era. And we're using methods that we weren't using during that era. So I personally think it's a new revolution. But that's, like I said, it's heavily debated right now.
Well, I can see how that makes sense. Okay, and then I have a question that's probably going to sound dumb, and I probably should have asked it before we started. Um, so, does agriculture also include animal husbandry, or is it strictly the plant stuff?
So this is actually a really common question, and I have a
Okay.
policy on my show. There's no such thing as a dumb question. But yeah, so agriculture is actually a much broader topic than a lot of people tend to realize. It includes plants, it includes animal husbandry, it even includes like forestry. So like
Oh, okay. Yeah.
like lumber production, and even mining can be considered agriculture to a degree. Fishing, aquaculture, permaculture, gardening is even a form of agriculture. Pretty much anything that involves the harvesting of natural resources and the production of commercial products, that's agriculture.
Okay. Okay. So you said the production of commercial products.
Right.
So, okay, I'm gonna ask I'm gonna ask you a very specific question.
Okay.
If I go as an individual, in a car, a truck, or whatever, if I go up the mountain and I find, say, a quartz vein
Mhm.
and I extract that quartz, but I just keep it in my house because quartz is real pretty and I never do anything, is that considered agriculture, even though it's the extraction of resources?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, well, that's kind of, that kind of begs the same question as gardening is, if you
Hmm.
garden but you don't give anyone your product, if you just eat it yourself, is it considered agriculture? Technically, the practice is considered agriculture because you're still utilizing a natural resource for a non-natural purpose, which it's natural to us because we eat it, but
Hmm.
it's not
Contributing back.
right. You're not giving it back to anything. You're not giving it to the population. You're not giving it back to the earth. Like, you're using it for a selfish purpose.
Hmm.
So that kind of is, well, that's why some people don't consider like gardening agriculture, but technically by the definition of agriculture, it still would be. So yes, if
Okay.
you were to go and mine quartz from, from a local quartz mine, then technically that would still be considered an agricultural practice. It just wouldn't be part of the agriculture industry.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense, and I could ask you pedantic questions all day about the specifics, and we don't need to do that, um, but yeah, that makes sense to me, so, like, okay, I'm gonna say what I kind of how I would phrase it, and you tell
Mhm.
me if it's just totally off base or maybe correct, who knows? So if, like, if I have someone to ask me what all agriculture is based on what you just told me, I would probably say things related to our relationship with and extracting of resources with the natural world as opposed to the world that we've created.
Yes, I would say that's an accurate description.
Okay. Okay, cool, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
And this is why I say that agriculture is the bridge between society and nature, is because it involves the extraction of natural resources to benefit society, but it also involves the production of things that we use in society like technology to benefit the environment. So it's a
Mhm.
two-way street. We're taking things from the environment, but we're also giving back to it tenfold.
Okay, okay, so here's a question that I have because you mentioned earlier that the, um the people push back against agriculture.
Mhm.
And so if agriculture, like forgetting the other resources, but just talking about food, if we were to get rid of agriculture, what the heck would we do?
Have you ever seen the movie Wall-E?
No, no, but
Okay.
it's like pills? Pill food?
No, so in Wall-E, it's this movie about a little robot that, he goes around
Mhm.
and he cleans up the earth while all the humans are in a spaceship way, way above Earth.
Okay.
And they drink milkshakes all day, but the milkshakes are made of food substance that's unclear. Nobody really knows where they get the food. There's weird theories about what the food is, but that's beside the point. But it's funny because I'm actually working on an episode right now about this movie. And the reason why is because I think the Wall-E is a perfect representation of what happens when we get rid of agriculture.
Mhm.
There's kind of this, everyone seems to think, and maybe this is what was intended, was that Wall-E is supposed to be about what happens if we overpollute the planet, if we
Yeah.
don't clean up our trash, if we allow capitalism to kind of reign free, if we don't regulate things, if we don't control the environmental damage that we're causing. And at the beginning of the movie, we see that the president at the time, he has to leave the planet because he can't breathe. He has to like put on like an oxygen mask and rush to the spaceship at the last second.
Okay.
And that's like a big part of the movie, is that like everyone's like, oh, the pollution must be so bad that he can't breathe. But what saves the movie is that they started planting plants again, and they figured out how
Mhm.
to regrow their environment and how to revitalize agriculture. And so to me, that kind of says it wasn't the pollution that was causing the problem.
It
So you
was the
guys
lack
killed all
of
the
plants.
plants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the oxygen.
right. And so that would be, if we were to destroy agriculture completely, assuming
Mhm.
we still had, natural plants, we would still have at least somewhat of an oxygen supply. We would have a very, very, very limited food supply because it'd be
Mhm.
mostly based off of hunting and gathering again, because we wouldn't have that same level of food production like we did. And not only that, I have this theory, and this is something that I'm kind of working on right now too, that agriculture is the foundation of society. And because
Mhm.
agriculture founded society, the first society was built around being able to farm.
Mhm.
And so I have a theory that if we were to separate agriculture from society, that society would fall.
I agree.
Because if you think about it, if we don't have a sustainable source of food, everyone's got to go find their own, and that
Mhm.
gets chaotic really, really quick. And
Mhm.
so, if we were to destroy agriculture, like I said, there's people who oppose it and who want to eradicate it. It's going to end really, really badly.
Yeah, like, I can't like, I've heard people oppose, like, what do they say, like, factory farming and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and, like, that to me, okay, like, I can hear you, you know, but, like, the idea of just ceasing to cultivate food and continue to grow plants, like, that's so
Mhm.
bizarre to me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who they have a very what's the word I'm looking for?
Narrow
Like a
view?
like what was that? I'm sorry.
Like a narrow view?
Yeah, yeah, kind of like a misled view of what agriculture actually is today. And so they see, so like you mentioned, factory farming. That's a
Mhm,
very common kind of like buzzword in the agricultural
mhm.
community, because what a factory farm is isn't super well defined. People don't really like, if somebody says, "Oh, I don't support factory farming," if you ask them what a factory farm is, they have a hard time really describing it. Sometimes you'll hear like imagery of like, massive, machine ran facilities that just, process animals automatically. Sometimes you'll hear, like you hear about like the chicken situation where they get pumped full of growth hormones and they just get plumped up and then thrown in like a
Mhm.
shredder kind of sorts. And it's just like, it sounds like terrible stuff, or like they're all stuck in cages and, like there's no light or, anything for them to be able to run around. Like that's kind of the imagery you start to hear.
Mhm.
But what a lot of people tend to don't realize is like you see videos of that kind of stuff online, but those
Mhm.
videos are taken from decades ago. Or if
Mhm.
they are more modern, they're in another country that's not as developed as we are.
Mhm.
Or,
And it's often like a slant, like a bias, like
right.
propaganda, really.
Right. No, and that's exactly what it is, there's just not there's not that many farms that do that kind of stuff anymore. We do have, large scale production that can look like that at times,
Mhm.
but 96% of family farm or of farms are family owned.
Mhm.
So like, that kind of, people say that we need to be giving farms back to families, not to factories. But a lot of those factory farms that people like to talk about are family owned. They're just really
Mhm.
big. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what people see large farms and think factory farm, when that's not really the case. Just small farms are dying out because of regulations and because of the markets. It's not because, factory farms and corporations are taking over. It's just because we can't afford to keep them alive anymore. They're getting kind of
Mhm.
drilled into the ground.
Yeah, it's just not accessible.
Right.
Well, and like, okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, because again, like I have an interest in it, so I've heard things, but
Yeah.
I don't really know what's true, and I haven't had the time to do all the research that I'd like to do. Um, but from what I understand, like for example, those machines, those big scary machines, like
Mhm.
so the ones that milk cows, everything that when I've talked to people who are actually in agriculture, what I've been told is that that's actually a lot more comfortable for the cow because they
Mhm.
don't have to wait to pump their milk and stuff like that. Wait for the farmer to come around. And so they're less uncomfortable. They get to do it on demand. They get, everything that they want on demand.
Mhm.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the dairy industry is actually, there's I have a friend of mine that has been on the show a couple times, and he's a very active dairyman. He like, posts on TikTok and Instagram. He's very, social media active because he likes to share this kind of stuff. He has this motto that I like to always tell people about the dairy industry. The point of the dairy industry is not to produce milk. The point of the dairy industry is to produce happy cows, and happy cows produce good milk. Because with any industry, but especially with agriculture, the more you stress out your unit, the worse the product is going to be. You
Hmm.
stress out your crops, they're not going to produce very well. They're not going to produce a very good looking fruit. If you stress
Hmm.
out your animals, they're not going to produce a very good looking product. If you stress out anything, it's not going to function very well. There aren't many things in this world that can function high off of high amounts of stress.
Hmm.
And so the same goes for, the dairy industry. If we stress out our cows, they're not going to give us very good milk. So we want to make sure they're as happy and comfortable as possible. And so we design all of our machines, all of our like it's gotten so, to a whole nother level now that cows have their own Fitbits. They have some people do collars, some of them do ear tags, some of them do just anklets around their ankle. And it tracks how many steps that cow has taken, if that cow's in heat, if she's sick, if she's drinking water, if she's not, if she's been in the sun too long. It tracks all of that. And then when she goes in to get weighed, it scans that tag and says, okay, this cow is sick. We need to watch her. Or this cow's doing great. She's going to produce a lot of good milk this year. And then when they go in to get milked, the machine is actually like specifically designed to kind of simulate a calf nursing. And that's why the
Hmm.
cow is so comfortable, is because, for one, like you said, it's at her own convenience. She can just go in and get milked whenever she needs to get milked. But for two, it feels natural to her. It doesn't feel
Hmm.
like some guy just grabbing onto her. It feels like an actual calf is sucking on her, and that helps her be more comfortable with the experience and produces better milk for us.
Hmm.
So with all agriculture, that's the idea, is to try to produce the most comfortable, healthy environment we can.
Okay, so I have I have so many questions. I love this
Good.
format.
I love it. It's awesome.
Um, so like someone like me, who, is I wouldn't say that I'm like poor, but I don't have like a lot of money. How does someone get involved if they want to get involved in agriculture when they don't have an inherited family farm or an
Mm.
inherited millions of dollars?
So that's the question of the year. I've been asked that quite a few times. I've asked myself that question before because I would like to get involved as well. It's it's a really not easy thing to do. Just because, for one, right now land is really scarce, and
Hmm.
it's very difficult to just take land and turn it into agriculturally productive land. Mostly because of, there's a few different reasons, but mostly because either that land is not suitable to excuse me, it's not suitable to grow anything, or that land is not like in a good, it's not in a good climate. So what you do want to grow just won't grow properly because of the climate. Maybe the land is too expensive, or it's going to get regulated into the ground, or whatever the case may be. It's really hard to get land. That's the
Mhm.
number one hurdle. If you can get the land, it becomes easier from there. But
Mhm.
the main difficulty that a lot of people find trying to get into agriculture is the price per entry is really, really high. You have to pay
Mhm.
a lot because you're investing, you're not just investing into, a plot of land, you're investing into, soil tests to make sure your soil is properly, it's suitable for growing. Let's just say you want to do cattle, you have to build fencing. If you want to do crops, you have to make sure that the climate that you're in is suitable for growing the crop you want to grow. And you got to check the
Mhm.
markets to make sure that your area is a good area for growing those crops.
Mhm.
If you want to go on the commercial level, you have to make sure that the truck driver is willing to drive out to your place to pick up your crop to go sell to the market. There's a lot of different factors to go into it. Um, One of the things that I've been looking into a lot lately is potentially going into a farm gate operation kind of setup. And for anyone who doesn't know, farm gate is kind of a very specified operation that's a lot smaller in scale. It still has a potential to be commercial, but mostly it focuses on community driven food production. So
Okay.
there's a farm gate operation back in my hometown that produces pigs. And so basically, let's just say you wanted to buy some pork chops and you want to buy like the whole pig. You can walk onto the operation. They'll give you a tour of the whole place. You get to
Mhm.
pick out which pig you want. They'll do all the cuts and everything, and they'll sell you the meat right there at the door. You don't have to go to the store for it. You don't have to go through the processing plant. There's no middleman. It's literally just from the farm to the plate right away. And that doesn't
That's
happen very
super
often,
cool.
right?
And is that like co-op style? Can you like buy in and be part of it?
I think that there are some operations that are like that, but a lot of them tend to be independently owned, just because it's
Okay.
easier for legal reasons. You don't have to worry about as many
Mhm.
regulations. There's not as much business stuff you have to deal with. It's just kind of it's easier to run independently. But I think that there are some that, like, I actually think that there's some cities who have bought out small plots of land that they've invested back into the community and allowed locals in the area to kind of pitch in for, in some areas of the world.
Yeah.
But that's something that I think is kind of, if you're looking to get into agriculture, a farm gate operation might be a bit easier to manage, just because for one, it is smaller, and for two, you're not running on the commercial level, so you're not going to be running into as many problems with regulation or with entry fees or anything like that.
Mhm. That's super, super cool. I, well, and okay, so I have, more questions.
Another question.
Uh,
Yeah.
the, so you were talking about how most farms are large scale now and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So I guess as someone who really, immerses themselves in the industry, I wonder, like, how viable is it? Like, I've often wondered if it's viable that, the larger scale farms would scale down and, because there's, I think, like you mentioned earlier in the show, sorry, I'm sort of rambling, but I've got a point, I
You're
promise.
good.
You mentioned earlier in the show that a lot of people want to be farmers or at least have like grow their own food for their families and stuff. And
Mhm.
and that's been my experience too, is I know a ton of people like that. And it might just be that we're attracting those people, but I think that it's also probably just a lot of people like that.
Mhm.
So if one family could feed say three families, so if like one third of people were to do, how viable is it that we did a bunch of micro farms?
I That's an interesting question. um, because the hard part about it is that there would have to be a lot of deregulation.
Mm,
That's the hardest part, is that small farms, like the reason that small farms aren't around anymore, because, anyone who studied history probably knows that at one point everyone had a farm. That was kind of the thing, was, every family
mhm,
had either some backyard chickens, or they were, they had a full on operation, or maybe they just had like a small, plot of crops in the backyard, or, everyone had farms at some point.
mhm,
Eventually, as urbanization began to spread, that became less and less common. And that's part of it too, is urbanization is a big factor. But the reason that so many small farms died out and so many large farms continued is because whenever a new wave of regulation hits, the small farms usually can't afford to cover themselves, and the big farms buy them out so they can save that land.
mhm,
Because a big fear right now in agriculture is that land is going to get bought out and turned into urban land, and we can't use it for farming anymore.
mhm.
Because a, a number I like to throw around to scare people is that, if, let's just say, there's a local Walmart nearby and
Yep.
there's no farms for miles, and somebody wanted to build a farm where that Walmart is, they could tear down the Walmart. They can't grow anything on that land though.
Yeah, because
And
it's already been concreted and stuff like that, right?
right. And even if you were to tear it all the way down to the topsoil, About an inch of topsoil takes about anywhere from 300 to 500 years to regenerate.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it really isn't an option to farm that land anymore for a while. So the more we urbanize, the less land we have access to. It's like if you have a 5 gallon or yeah, 5 gallon bucket full of water and you cut off 2 gallons, that bucket can only ever be so full. It can only ever
Hmm.
hold 3 gallons again. It's not like we can get that 2 gallons back because we cut it off. It's the same thing with the land. If we cut off that topsoil from building buildings, we can't ever use that land again, not for another 500 years. And we don't have that kind of time. So it's a big fear in agriculture right now is that that land is going to get eaten up by urban
And
sprawl. And so in order to try to reduce that from happening, larger farms will buy out smaller farms to
hmm
preserve the land. That way it
Yeah,
can't get
better to
bought
have a
out.
large farm than to have it urbanized. That makes
Right.
sense.
So
So the whole topsoil thing though, okay, so I thought, and I am obviously wrong about a lot of things, and that's fine. Um, I thought that we could participate in helping the soil to regenerate through using, easier crops to grow or mycology
mhm.
or introducing nitrogen or like lighting some shit on fire on it or what sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss, I didn't mean to.
It's fine.
uh, but I thought that we had methods that could improve the quality and usability, airability, or whatever the word is of the soil.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We do. The thing is, once we've already destroyed that topsoil, there's nothing more we can do. We can only benefit soil that's still alive. As soon as we kill the soil, there's no bringing it back.
And by
Because
alive, you mean the microorganisms and stuff?
yes, mhm.
Okay.
So soil, like you just mentioned, is made up of microbiomes. There's tons of just a network of microorganisms living underneath it. Whenever we kill that topsoil, we just killed a ton of those biomes, and it's the biomes that keep the soil healthy and able to grow things. We can only keep soil healthy if it's already alive. As soon as we kill off those microbiomes, it takes a very long time to be able to bring them back. If we have soil that's, let's just say it's been leached or it's starting to dry out or it's having issues and it's starting to kind of die off, we can rejuvenate it. Like you said, we can use nitrogen fixing crops. We can use crops that actually take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. That's actually one of the more regenerative methods that we've been looking into to try to reduce carbon emissions, is to just put it back
Hmm.
into soil and regenerate the soil with it.
Helps everybody, yeah.
Right. And so there are methods. There's even like newer technology that we're using to try to, we can, it's kind of crazy. There's a new branch of agriculture called precision agriculture
Okay.
that's entirely focused on very, very, very small scale fixes. So like, you have a drone flying over a field, it can tell you where the highest moisture content is in the soil. It can tell you where the most microbiomes are. It can tell you where the insects are the most commonly found and if they're benefiting the soil or if they're hurting it. Like it can tell you all that stuff.
Hmm.
And so we can specialize our treatment of the soil to those areas instead of just mass treating all of the soil.
Okay.
And so there are methods involved in trying to keep the soil that we still have alive and healthy. But if the soil has already died, if it's already been, paved over, it's it's not impossible to bring it back, but it's to a point where we don't quite have the technology done yet to be able to do that effectively.
Okay, that makes sense. And I mean, I'm not trying to like hammer home this idea or anything, but
No, I know.
like so like this is okay, I know how ridiculous this is gonna sound.
Okay.
But we have the same type of thing in our stomachs, right?
Mhm.
Guts. And so couldn't we hypothetically, and I know that it's, and especially with a combination of precision agriculture, couldn't we, mix some of the live soil with the dying soil and add a bunch of like yogurt or something equivalent, to really encourage that to grow into the soil, and then we have twice as much, or is that just a no go?
So I know that
I know
modern
yogurt's not.
soils, a lot of soil scientists are working on a way to do that right now.
Mhm.
They're trying to find ways of. So actually, this is something you might find interesting. We're trying to find a way to grow food on the moon.
Oh, yes, that is interesting.
I actually just did an episode on this a few weeks ago. I had a guest on who's actually working on the project that, or I think he was.
No
I'm not sure if he
way.
still is. He's working
Oh.
for NASA on the project to grow food on the moon, and he let me know on some of the things that they're trying. The moon soil is nowhere near suitable for growing crops. Like
Mhm.
it's so I don't remember if it's acidic or if it's just
Super
barren.
alkaline.
Yeah, something's wrong with it. It's not anywhere near suitable for growing crops. So we're actually basically like transplanting soil onto the moon, and so we
Mhm.
can mix it with moon soil and see if we could turn it into something usable. So we're
Mhm.
trying that method on our own soil. We're trying to combine dead soil with a live soil and see if some of those microbiomes can do something with it.
Mhm.
We're having a bit of trouble finding any success with it, but it is in the works. So
Okay.
the idea is eventually, yes, we could do what you said and try to revitalize a lot of the soil that we lost. But
Mhm.
in order to do that, that requires two things. First of all, that requires the technology to be perfected and to a point where
Mhm.
we can do it efficiently and effectively, and it's not going to cost $1 million.
Mhm.
And two, that requires us to have a better conversation about the use of urban land versus rural land.
Mhm.
It's not exactly easy to talk a city into bulldozing a building so we could grow some plants there.
Mhm.
It's That's kind of the hardest part right now, is even if we can hold on to the land that we have, producing new land is going to be very difficult because there's not a whole lot of land just lying around.
Mhm.
There is a lot of land that's not being used right now because it's all desert,
Yeah.
and there actually are methods right now that are being experimented with to try to kind of reverse desertification.
Mhm.
If that's like basically we're trying to use like grazing animals to try to see if we can bring deserts back to life, and we actually have had some level of success.
Oh, okay.
So like there's right now we're in a very this is why I say we're in a new generation of agriculture, because we're in a
Mhm.
very experimental phase of trying a lot of different things to try to bring our soil back to life. And so that's kind of the hope, is that eventually, yes, we will be able to bring the soil back enough to a point where small farmers can still survive. But again, the regulation's a big part of it, and all of the other, like the markets are very difficult to keep up with. But if like a farm gate market were to kind of appear, then maybe that could be a thing. It's kind of just right now there's so many unknowns that it's really hard to say for sure. Like, yeah, you could go out there and start a farm and it'll do just fine, just because we don't know what's still out there that's available to use, and we don't know what's going to be coming down the pipeline over the next few years.
Mhm. Well, honestly, that's really exciting to me. I'm glad that I asked you those very specific questions because it feels a little more hopeful now.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, we don't have a yay, but we have a maybe,
Right.
and that's cool.
Yeah, and that's kind of a big thing that I try to stress, is that a lot of people are like, "Are we doomed?" I'm like, "No, we're not doomed. It's just gonna be really hard. Like
Mhm.
we're not giving up yet, because everyone's like, oh, we're gonna move to Mars and we're gonna start farming over there, and we're like, hey, we still have a lot of Earth left. How about we stop destroying Earth and we fix it, and then we can just keep growing food here."
Well,
And
oh,
sorry,
sorry,
go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, you go, you go.
I was just gonna say that I like to have the conversation with people a lot about how far we've come in terms of being able to revert a lot of the environmental damage that's been caused
Mhm.
both by agriculture and other industries. Um, and how much we've been able to figure out in terms of like, the farm gate situation and the soil regeneration and all that kind of stuff. Like you said, there is hope. It's not like a yes, we can fix this. It's like a we might be able to do something with this.
Mhm.
But it's more than, hey, we're screwed. We got to move to another planet.
Yeah, and better to put our energy into trying than just give up, for
Right.
sure. Okay, so I have I guess my next question for you. You're so freaking knowledgeable and helpful. This is so fun.
Yeah.
My next question would be about I think you called it aquaculture, but
Mhm.
maybe I don't know. Um, and how does that play in? Because I know that there is soil under the oceans and under lakes and stuff like that, and I obviously know that aquatic plants exist and
Mhm.
aquatic animals and stuff. How does that relate to the whole soil shortage and the farming situation?
So that's a really good question, actually. I might need to do some more research on that one.
Oh, okay.
I kind of have a very general understanding of aquaculture. I'm not quite as specified in that area.
Okay.
I have gotten to experience a bit of like fish farming, and that's involved in aquaculture. Uh, Aquaculture tends to, like you mentioned, it has to do a lot with underwater plants and being able to grow things using our oceans and that sort of thing. But I'm not exactly sure what the soil situation is looking like for that, because they have a very different soil situation than we
Mhm.
do. Obviously, they
For
have
sure, yeah.
a very different environment than we do. So I would have to do more research on that particular topic, just because I don't want to say anything and somebody go and look it up and be like, oh, he said this and it was actually wrong, because I don't
Yeah,
really know that
that's
much about
fair.
aquaculture. I will say that the reason I brought aquaculture up is to show that there's a lot of variety in agriculture,
Mhm,
and there's a lot of variety in research in agriculture, because that's a big thing too. Is agriculture at the end of the day is a science. It is, it's an environmental science, and
mhm,
so we have a lot of researchers and scientists dedicated to agriculture, just focus on trying to find ways to, sustain a food supply that will be able to feed us for the next, thousands of years. And they are using different aspects of agriculture that we typically wouldn't have looked into. So
Hmm.
aquaculture, permaculture, horticulture, even regenerative ag, or organic stuff. Like every branch of agriculture has its own specialized way of doing things. And the
Hmm.
researchers are basically saying, hey, what if we try that, but on this side of agriculture and see if it
Yeah,
works?
yeah, that's what I was wondering, exactly.
Okay. And
Yeah,
so
so
I'm
sorry, go
not
ahead.
sorry. I'm not quite sure if they've experimented a whole lot with aquaculture's methods yet, but I would say that's probably not out of the question yet.
That's super cool and really exciting to me. And then I guess the other big question that I have, and maybe it's not a big question, but whatever, is conservation. How does conservation
Mm,
play in things like we've got in BC here a wolf call that we
mhm,
do, and everybody hates it, but I'm like, okay, but we kind of need it. I mean, maybe we caused it, but we still need it. So
mhm.
like, how does that play in? And then like, what's the relationship between conservation and the agricultural communities?
So agriculture and conservation have a very interesting relationship. That's kind of a big reason that a lot of people seem to oppose agriculture, is because they fear that agriculture doesn't care about conservation.
Hmm.
But it's actually kind of the reverse. Agriculture cares a lot about conservation. It focuses
Hmm.
very heavily on preserving the environment in any way possible. There's a certain aspect of, the nature's going to do what nature's going to do. You can't conserve everything just because naturally it might have degraded anyways.
Hmm.
Um, and that's kind of, the I'm trying to organize my thoughts here while speaking, and it's never a good thing. Um, one of the things that a lot of people worry about with conservation and agriculture is like forest conservation, because
Hmm.
deforestation is a big part of agriculture,
Hmm.
and people often fear why we deforest things so much. There is a purpose in it. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
all of it's good. We have torn down some forests. I think that in South America, like near Brazil area, they tore down a bunch of forest land to produce like beef ranches. And I actually got a question about that. People were like, "Why are they doing this?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like
Because
there are some farmers
humans
that
getting
just
human.
right. Like there are some farmers who just want to do things for the sake of doing them. Like then they're not really doing it because they need it. It's because they just think they can do it and make more money that way.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say that every farmer is perfect or that everyone in agriculture is a good person, because
Yeah.
with any industry there's going to be corruption. That's just how that works. Um, I will say though that one of the primary goals of agriculture, like I mentioned, is to preserve, the environment.
Mhm.
A big issue that a lot of people tend to have is issues with biodiversity. We
Yeah.
tend to not introduce multiple types of crops. Monocropping is kind of the way to go for agriculture right now, but
Yeah.
just because it's popular on the commercial level, and it's easier to it's easier to spray a whole field of corn rather than part of a field of corn and part of a field of cotton and part of a field of like it's hard to multi-crop. It's hard to polycrop.
Mhm.
It's not the easiest thing to manage from a commercial perspective, and that's why it's not super common.
Mhm. And
Um,
oh, sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I would also think that it's hard to cycle.
Right.
Because you need different equipment for
Mhm.
harvesting and growing corn than you do, say, potatoes or whatever. And so
Right.
now your barn needs to be 3 times the size if you wanna cycle your crops.
Yes, and so yeah, that's a big thing too. Is that monocropping is just the best way to go. But if you talk to a regenerative farmer, you really want to have biodiversity in your production, because biodiversity increases the health of the soil. Everything goes back to the soil. The soil is the foundation of all of this. If
Mhm.
you have biodiversity in your crops, you're going to have biodiversity in your microbiomes, which increases the nutrients available in the soil, which causes healthier crops and higher yields and all this kind of stuff. But again, it's not the most efficient means of production, and that's why we don't really do it a whole lot. A lot of the concern with conservation, though, from the crop perspective, is not just biodiversity, but it's what's the best way to put this? Basically, people fear that we've domesticated crops and animals and kind of evolved them to a point where they were never supposed to be.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so because of that, we've let other animals die off that probably should have survived. Like
Mhm.
I guarantee you today that if we had not domesticated cows would not have survived very long, because
Yeah.
they're not the hardiest animal. I mean, they're hardy, but they're also kind of dumb, and
Yeah.
so they
And
probably wouldn't have
slow.
lasted.
Yeah.
Um, so and that's a concern for a lot of people. They're like, hey, why are all these gophers and squirrels and other rodents dying while we're harvesting crops, but your cows are allowed to survive just fine? It's like, well, can't really help that. Like
Mhm.
we kept the animals alive that we need to survive. Everything else, that's kind of their problem, which is
Mhm.
it's a harsh way of putting it, but if a squirrel gets run over by a tractor while it's harvesting crops, that's kind of the squirrel's fault for getting in the way. I
Mhm.
mean, we can't be accountable for every living thing near the farm. We have to be accountable for what we chose to be responsible for, which that's kind of the part where it's understandable why people kind of have an issue with agriculture, is that we can't we can't, like I said, we can't be responsible for everything. There's just so much moving on a farm. We can't handle all of it at once.
Well, and that makes sense, and it sounds to me like you're saying that conservation and agriculture have a symbiotic yet tense relationship.
Right. That's the best way to put it.
Okay, well, and you mentioned something and it piqued something in me. So you
Mhm.
were talking about selective letting people or not people, animals or plants, survive and stuff like that. And selective breeding is kind
Mhm.
of what comes to mind. Specifically, people talk so much about what is the word that they use for things that are grown gosh, people get really uptight about it. They're like, I don't want GMO, that's
GMOs.
the
Oh
term,
yeah.
right? And so when people talk about that, I always find it weird because when I think of like, there's two kinds of GMO, right? There's like
Mhm.
chemical lab GMO, and like where they are like going in and splicing DNA and changing stuff
Mhm.
around. And then there's the stuff that's done in the field, like grafting or selective breeding. Like, I want like, the lettuce and or not
Mhm.
lettuce, cabbage and broccoli and all that came from wild cabbage, right? Like the
Right.
same plant. And that was all done in the field before we
Mhm.
had labs. So how do you usually broach that topic and like cool people down when they start getting all heated about stuff they don't understand?
See, this is one of my favorite conversations to have. GMOs are like, that's like one of my specializations in terms of knowledge. Like I've done probably, of all of the research I've done in agriculture, GMOs is one of the things I have the most knowledge about, besides like, beef industry and like the dairy industry, because I grew up around that stuff. But like
Mhm.
I've done my homework on GMOs. So that one's like the one I'm the most comfortable with. So I'm glad that you asked this. This is a lot of fun. Um, the best way to approach it that I've found is, well, like you said, there's different types of genetic modification, and because of that, we have to kind of go into them separately. You can't approach all GMOs the same.
Mhm.
There's a very complex conversation that you have to have first. So if you want to go in the selective breeding route, if people are upset about the fact that we've selectively bred cows all these years, or we've selectively bred corn, I would ask them to look at their dog
Mhm.
and or their cat, or like any animal that they have as a pet, because that animal was selectively bred.
Mhm.
I guarantee you pugs did not happen naturally. That's just not like,
Fair.
there's no reason for a pug to occur naturally. That thing would not survive out in the
Yeah,
wild. And so,
absolutely.
and that's
Chihuahuas
always
too. They're pretty.
right. Right, and that's always my argument, is that, and that's the biggest thing too, is you can't approach it from the perspective of you're wrong, let me tell you why. You have to approach it from the perspective of let me show you what you're familiar with and relate it to what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
And that's kind of my approach for most things in life is, if somebody's getting kind of heated about something, then I usually say like, hey, how about you look at it this way and see
Mhm.
if you still disagree with it. And that tends to be pretty comfortable for them, because if I say like, your dog's technically a GMO, they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, your dog was not here 1,000 years ago. Like, not just your dog, your breed of dog was not here 1,000 years ago. They were all wolves, and they were all, or maybe a little more than 1,000 years ago, but they were all wolves, and they eventually bred down to your little, smash face little puppy there. Like, that's just not how that works. And so when they started to realize that, they're like, oh. And I was like, yeah, we do the same thing. Like, if you saw the original, I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, but corn back before we started crossbreeding it.
Yeah, like maize.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
this big, and it's like, it looks like a stick. It doesn't even look like corn.
Mhm.
And we crossbred it for so long to now it's like this big old ear of corn that we enjoy, or yeah, like this corn cob that we enjoy just munching on. Um, and it's people see that, and they think, oh, you genetically modified it to be that big. Like, you took it in a lab, and you did all this experimenting on it to make it look all weird like that. No, we've been doing that for centuries.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the big thing too, is that people tend to, so this is a big old tangent I'm going to go on right now, but it's
I'm into
relevant
it.
to what I'm talking about. I'm going to come back to it. But I'm working on a theory, like a mini series right now for the podcast, on my theory about why the urban rural split happened. So why people aren't as informed about agriculture anymore, why agriculture and urban communities don't really talk anymore, why that whole split is even a thing.
Hmm.
And that split is, I think, the reason why like GMOs, for example, are so feared. It's the reason why, so many things in agriculture are so feared, is because people have been away for so long that they're finally getting reintroduced to it, and they're like, that's not natural. It's like, no, we've been
Hmm.
doing this for a while, you just didn't see us doing it the first time.
Hmm.
So like, for example, with like the chicken situation, like I mentioned earlier, people are fearful about like, us stuffing all kinds of growth hormones into chickens and making them get a lot bigger. In the history of all of agriculture, there has never been a growth hormone stuffed inside a chicken. It's legal. It never has been legal.
Oh.
And it's like, if you see like chicken in the store that says hormone free, yeah, they all are. Like every chicken is hormone free. They've never had hormones in them. Well, artificial hormones. Every animal has hormones in them.
Yeah.
But so like if it says hormone free, that's kind of a redundant label, because all chickens are hormone free. They don't have growth hormones in them because it's illegal to do so. But people saw chickens, 100 years ago, and they were all small and kind of like, they weren't as big and plump and fat as
Yeah,
they are
more like
now.
the game hens.
Right. And so 100 years passes, and nobody's been involved with agriculture all that time. And all of a sudden they see the chickens and they're super big, and they're like, oh, they must have pumped them full of growth hormones. Like, no, we just breed bigger chickens now. Like, we figured out how to make them fat through breeding.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with our crops. People see corn today and they say, oh, it's genetically modified, that's why it's so big. It's like, no, it's been like that for a while. We just have been crossbreeding it for a very long time.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of that's the part of the conversation that they tend to have an easier time with. When you get into GMOs and CMOs, like the actual like lab stuff, that's where it
Yeah.
starts to get kind of sticky. And it's not an easy thing to convince everybody of, and that's kind of the mentality I go into it with, is not everyone's going to be okay with it, and that's fine. If they're not okay with it, they're not okay with it. You're not going to be able to convince them. But for people who genuinely want to know, they're not opposed to it, they're just curious, I usually explain to them that the reason we genetically modify is basically as an accelerated form of evolution. So we
Hmm.
could reach those same results through generations of crossbreeding, or we could get it done with one generation with genetic modification. And basically, so like for example, corn, about 98% of all corn is genetically modified. Like we GMO
Hmm.
a lot of corn, but we GMO it mostly to be insecticide, or to have natural insecticide in it, so it's pest resistant, so it's weather resistant, so it has higher yields, so it's more stable. Like there's a bunch of reasons that we genetically modify corn. It's not just because we want to see if we can make this franken food of corn. It's
Hmm.
because we want to do things that are going to be beneficial to the crop and beneficial to the environment. And by doing that to corn, we have to spray less pesticides because they
Yeah.
already had the pesticide in them. So that automatically lowers our pesticide use, which is a good thing. It lowers our use of certain types of machinery that would normally have to get rid of certain like weeds or other damage that could potentially come to the crop. So that
Hmm.
lowers our costs. There's so many benefits to it that there's really no reason not to do it. And the other thing people tend to freak out about is they think that everything is genetically modified. There's only like 12 crops that are actually genetically modified. And even then, there's
Really?
not that many of them that are like a high percentage of those crops are genetically modified.
And that's in the lab, right?
Right.
That you
Yeah.
mean? Yeah.
hmm
Okay.
So like corn, soybeans, I think there's another one that's in the top three. Everything else is like less than 1% of those crops are genetically modified. Like
Wow.
it's all like such trace amounts. Like you see like, non-GMO grapes. There's no such thing as a GMO grape. There never has been. There's only one GMO animal. Like people like to say like, I don't want genetically modified beef. It's like that doesn't
Oh,
exist.
can I guess which one it is?
Sure. Let's see if you can
Oh,
figure it out.
okay.
I
So I'm going to ask you
guarantee
a couple questions. Is it a mammal?
it is not a mammal.
Is it a fish?
It is a fish, actually.
Oh, oh, is it goldfish?
No, it is a
It's a
fish that
food
we
we,
eat.
it's a food?
Yes.
Okay, it's gotta be that one that nobody likes. Um, maybe not. Okay, is it cod?
It's not cod.
Okay, I give up. I give up.
It's a salmon.
Salmon? No way.
So it's called the Chinook salmon, and it's a very specific breed of
I
salmon.
think I think we have that here.
Oh, really?
Anyways, yeah.
So the Chinook salmon was the first ever and only ever genetically modified animal to reach the markets, at least.
Mhm.
And it was genetically modified just to grow at a faster rate. That was literally it.
Uh-huh.
It was just we found a way to inject it with a gene that makes it grow at a faster rate. It's not any different. It doesn't have any weird like genetic deformities going on. It literally just grows faster. So like now we have salmon that are this big as opposed to this big. And so,
Mhm.
and that's literally just so we could sell more salmon. It's just so we have more of that product that we can get on the market faster.
Mhm.
Ever since we put that salmon on the market, genetically modified animals have been so like feared that we haven't been able to get anything else out. So,
That's so interesting.
mhm.
Oh, okay. I have one more question about GMO.
Okay.
One more question, and I don't even know if it's really GMO. It's sort of loosely related, and it's definitely in the field. I think it's called Gros Michel banana.
That sounds
And
familiar.
it was so originally like, okay, so this is what I've heard. You may know, you may not, who knows? But originally, apparently, so the banana flavoring. So think of like runts,
Mhm.
um, and how that tastes so very different than banana, or
Right.
banana penicillin, same thing. And so apparently the Gros Michel banana is what that flavoring comes from. And it basically went through a terrible situation because they would be cultivated by like propagating through branches. And so they
Mm.
eventually evolved to not need seeds.
Mhm.
And then one like I think it was a bacteria or like an illness virus, something like that, came and wiped out all of those bananas. And that's why we use the Cavendish. Is
Yes.
that true? And like how much risk is there of that in other things? Because I know a lot of like grafted trees and stuff are done that way.
Yes. No, that's an excellent question. And so TR4, tropical run 4, was the disease that wiped. I don't know if that was the banana variety that got wiped out, but there was a couple years ago there was an issue with that with a banana. Like it was actually called I think Panama disease or something like that, or it's something like that. There was a disease that wiped out a massive chunk of bananas. And the reason why is because they refused to genetically modify those bananas.
Oh.
They're all genetically identical because they were propagated through branches instead of seeds.
Hmm.
So that's kind of, and that's it's ironic. People think that bananas are genetically modified because they don't have seeds. It's like, no, we crossbred them so they don't have seeds. They're not genetically modified, and that's why they almost all died. A
Hmm.
big, a big fear with a lot of plants, and especially this is another problem with monocropping, is if you use crops that don't reproduce sexually, they're all genetically identical. And if they're
Hmm.
all genetically identical, one thing can kill all of them at once because
Hmm.
they're all the same. So they're all going to be as equally susceptible to it as the last one. So those bananas, because they're all propagated through branches, are all genetically identical. So they're all going to be susceptible to that thing. And bananas are kind of sensitive crops anyway, so they really weren't going to be all that hardy against whatever was going to hit them. But that
Hmm.
is a concern with a lot of other genetically modified crops. Is the reason why we do that is so that way they have genetic diversity, and so they don't get wiped out by one thing. Like, yes, we can crossbreed things to get rid of seeds. We do that with watermelons and grapes, but it's better that they have the genetic diversity so that way they're more immune to a lot of those diseases and pests than to have them seedless for the consumer.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, like, when you see seedless stuff in the store, it's great because you're like, oh yeah, no, I don't have to worry about any seeds. That's awesome. But then you have to remember that farmer probably had to work really hard to make sure that those crops did not die. So
Hmm.
that's kind of why I preach, GMOs are a good thing because they prevent us from losing a lot of food that we probably normally would have lost.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you would think like a GMO, you could step in and give it some more, what's the word for that? The
Like
like
resistance.
resilience, but that's
Yeah.
not quite the word I want. But um, yeah, and for some reason, all of this stuff makes me think of the whole pando thing, and it makes me think of
Mm.
bamboo and rhizomes and how there's so many interesting ways that plants can be like that. But I get you see, I guess I have more interest in it and have read more about it than I realized. I'm
Yeah.
realizing that during this conversation.
Well, this is the funny thing too is you bring up a good point. You know more about it than you thought you did. That happens to occur a lot with people. Is we start talking about agriculture and they're like, oh, I knew about that. And like, because this is our food we're talking about. Like, you're gonna know a lot more about it than you tend to realize. You may not know all the specifics, but a lot of people have a pretty decent knowledge of agriculture if you start to just put it in terms that they understand. A big issue that I've kind of found with the agriculture industry, and this is, I criticize my own industry all the time because I think we
Yeah.
could do better, is that we talk in this scientific jargon that nobody understands and expect people to know what we're talking about, and then we get mad at them for not knowing what we're talking about and getting scared of it. If we just talk in language that people understand and that they can appreciate, then they're going to understand it just fine. Like, the entire purpose of my podcast is to relate agriculture to things that people are interested in. That's why I talk about movies and video games. That way I can show, like, hey, agriculture is all around us, and not only is it all around us, you probably know a lot more about it than you really understand or that you thought you did, because it's very simple to understand. It's just that we use weird terms for it.
Okay, so I've got one more question, last question, I
All
swear,
right.
and it's a bit of a weird question,
Let's hear it.
but nutritional values, how do they
Yes.
figure those out?
Good question. So there are tests that they can do on individual plants, and so like I'm sure you've heard of oh, what's it called? So in the science, when applying the scientific method, there's a certain practice you can use where you take like a piece of something, and that's supposed to give you an idea of what the whole thing is like.
Oh, yes, yes, like sampling. Oh, I know the word too, but I can't
I
remember it either.
Yeah,
Ah,
but that's what I'm going for. It's gonna drive me crazy.
yeah,
Um,
me too.
but so they can do that. They can take a few fruits off of a tree. Let's just say it's oranges, and they'll actually do what's called a Brix test. And a Brix test basically means they take some juice from the orange, they'll run some light through it, and however long it takes for the light to get through the juice tells you what the sugar content of that juice is. And so
Oh,
it's really cool.
that
And
is cool.
so through tests similar to that one, but for other fruit and vegetables, they can kind of determine what the nutritional content of what that what that fruit or vegetable is, and typically it's dependent on what minerals and vitamins are typically available in there, and then what percentage of those compared to the average is in there. So like let's just say spinach on average, because spinach tends to be pretty high in iron. Let's
Mhm.
just say spinach on average tends to have, I don't know, just 5 grams of iron, just to throw a number out there.
Okay.
That could be completely inaccurate.
Yeah, fair.
If you pick a spinach leaf and you run the test on it, it only has 2 grams of iron in it, then that spinach is not going to be as healthy for you as this one that has 5 grams of iron in it. And
Mhm.
so it might, 2 grams of iron versus 5 grams of iron, that's, it's only got 40% of the usual iron. And so like they may market it differently than the one that's healthier for you. I mean, like that's kind of how they can determine on average, what like they say like you should eat oranges because it's high in vitamin C, or you should eat spinach because it's high in iron, or you should eat like carrots because it's high in beta carotene, and that's that is a synthesizer for vitamin A and all this kind of stuff. You're told that stuff and you're told to believe it, but you don't really know why that stuff is true.
Mhm.
And there's actually it's really cool. There's physical signs that you can use to tell if something has a good amount of minerals in it or not, or
Ooh,
vitamins.
ooh.
So like for example, carrots and pumpkins, the reason they're orange is because they're high in vitamin A. That's just how they are.
Mhm.
So a carrot or a pumpkin that's not super orange, if it's kind of yellowy, it's probably not going to be as high in vitamin A. Which this is another interesting side note. Do you know why milk is white?
I actually don't know.
So milk is white for the same reason your
Calcium?
bones are white. It's high in calcium. And
I
so
didn't mean to clap. I got
no, you're good.
excited.
No, that was good. But yeah, so your milk is high in calcium, so it's white. There's actually a milk that's produced by a particular breed of dairy cow called an Ayrshire that's yellow. Do you know why?
Oh. Oh, I don't like it. Is it vitamin A?
It is. It's high in it's beta carotene, and so it's got the same stuff in it that carrots and pumpkins do. So it turns kind of a yellowy orange color, which is weird, but there's actually a market for it apparently. But
Maybe as
back
an
to
ingredient. It'd be a
right.
good I would wanna drink a glass of yellow milk.
Right. And so that's that's the way they're able to tell is certain fruits and vegetables are a certain coloration, or they have certain physical appearances because of what minerals and vitamins are available in them. If you look at a tree and its leaves are kind of they have yellow spots on them, or like you can actually like see the veins of the leaves really well, and the rest of the leaf isn't that green, it usually has a mineral deficiency of some kind.
Yeah,
And depending on
chlorophyll usually, right?
right, it could be chlorophyll, and usually what happens is chlorophyll won't function properly if it doesn't have the nutrient content it
Got
desires,
you, got
and
you.
so it might be calcium deficient, or it might be magnesium deficient, and so you can look at the leaves and say, oh, that has this deficiency. Like that was actually something that I was taught when I was younger. Is you can look at a citrus tree and say if it has a zinc deficiency or an iron deficiency or whatever, and that tells you, okay, I need to put this fertilizer onto this tree. That way it can get this nutrient that's missing. And so looking at the fruit afterwards, you can tell, because like if you look at an orange that's vibrant and it's got like that bright orange color and all that kind of stuff, it usually tastes better because it usually has a higher nutrient content. Whereas an orange that's all yellow and kind of saggy and gross, it's not going to have as much nutrient content in it. That's why it's not as stable.
Mhm. Wow, and so okay, I lied. I said the last one was my last one, but this one is for real.
Okay.
Um, so on that subject,
Mhm.
are fruits and vegetables getting healthier, or are they getting less healthy as a whole?
That so as a whole, I would say that they're getting healthier, yes, because we
Nice.
have a better way of figuring out how to invest that kind of nutrition into them. And so through crossbreeding, through genetic modification, and through just a better understanding of what to look for, they're much more nutrient dense.
Nice.
You'll notice why there's a lot more foods that are be considered superfoods now.
Hmm.
Like back in the day, a superfood there was like one or two. Now there's like a bunch of superfoods. You got
Hmm.
kale, and you've got, it's like spinach is almost a
Blueberries.
superfood. Yeah, blueberries. Even milk is considered a superfood. Yes, that one was
That's
that's always a
surprising to
funny
me.
one. Mhm.
Yeah.
But like there's a lot of foods that are considered superfoods because for one, the nutrient density is increasing, and we're finding new and better ways to find how many nutrients are in a particular food. So yes, foods are getting healthier.
Wow, you're a really good teacher.
Thanks. That's
Uh,
actually what I'm studying.
oh, really? Oh,
I'm
that's
at
so
yeah,
exciting.
I'm in college right now to be a teacher. So
Elementary school?
high school agriculture teacher.
Oh, you
So
brave.
right.
That's so exciting. Oh, thank you so much for teaching me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. You asked some great questions.
Thank you. I like to think of myself as a good question asker.
Awesome. Well, before we close out, I'd like to give you the chance to remind people who you are, and if you want to plug anything, you're more than welcome to.
All right, cool. Thank you, Brendan. So I am Kara Fernstrom, and I'm actually the host of a podcast that I do that is a very similar format. Let me not quite. I usually ask the questions, but it's the same idea where it's about happiness and well-being, and I just want to make it more accessible for people. Same reasoning. There's a lot of high-level jargon, and I'd like to take away some of that and bring happiness and wellness into people's lives better. And so that's called The Conquest of Bliss, and you can find it under that name on like a lot of places, and I'm not going to list them all.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'll put all your links down in the description and everything too, tell people can find you easier. Before we close out, is there anything else you wanted to add, or you have any other questions?
Oh, I have so many questions, but I can't, I don't.
We might need to do a part two.
Yeah. I would absolutely come back and ask you so many more questions.
Awesome.
Um, but yeah, I just, again, thank you so much. I'm so honored that you took the time to teach me and help me to understand. And it's just so exciting. And I'm going to tell everybody all the things I've learned and share this with everyone.
Well, that's the whole goal. This is, if you can just get one person talking about it, then everyone else hears about it, and that's, whole purpose of the podcast isn't to expand; it's to expand the knowledge. It's to get people to talk
Mhm.
about this more. So
Yes, yes, same. And then
awesome.
I guess I do have one question, but it's not agriculture related.
All right.
It's your hat says Egg Venture. Is
Yes.
that merch?
So it's not my merch.
Oh,
I
okay.
I wish that it was. So we have in my hometown of Tulare, which is about an hour south of where I'm at right now, in smack dab middle of California. We have what's called the International Agri Center. We host a what do you call it? Kind of like this massive exposition. It's called the World Ag Expo. And
Okay.
basically people come from all around the world to visit, and they learn all about agriculture, what we're doing. We have technology expositions. People can see the new tech that's coming out in ag. We have farmers from, Italy, Sweden, Germany, like all over the place. I've met people from all around the world that have been at this thing, and I go every year. And there is a branch of the International Agri Center that focuses on education for young kids, like K through 8,
Yeah.
and they're called Ag Ventures. And so, I used to volunteer and help out with the Ag Ventures team, and I used to help record videos for them and create little educational content. And they're a one-man department, or technically a one-woman department. The woman who runs it, her name's Carissa. She's been on the show before. She's awesome, and so she's helped me out a lot with kind of my, you know, my progress as an educational content creator, and I've helped her a lot kind of develop her department some more. So she gave me a free hat.
That is so dope. And did they live stream it at all?
No, we do have the videos available, but I'll have to see, because there's some permission issues with it being owned
Mm,
by that organization.
fair
So I have to
enough.
check in and see if I can get access to them. But yeah, we definitely have done quite a bit of work on that stuff. I wish we did more live streams and that kind of stuff. I think it'd be fun, but
Yeah, maybe next year because of the whole COVID thing, they'll start live streaming the conference. That would be super cool.
yeah, I will say, okay, so I do have videos on my YouTube from it.
Okay.
I did, because I got invited to be part of the media team 2 years in a row, and so
Oh,
I got to come on and interview all the vendors that were there, and so it was awesome. So I
that's a
have,
real adventure.
yeah, so I had tons of videos of me interviewing different farmers and technologists and engineers and all these people from all around the world, as they kind of sold their product. And so I got to post those on YouTube. So if you guys are looking for more information about the World Ag Expo, then check out my YouTube and you can find it there.
That's sick. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up here. Thanks again, Kara, for joining me. This has been a lot of fun. I'm more than happy to have you back on for another episode sometime.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks to all my listeners for tuning in and for all the support you guys have given me all this time. It's sure been a blast, and hope to see you guys on next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.